Greetings, Pilgrims, to episode 18 of the Polygon Pilgrimage. This week we're going to take a look at concept to creation, and what I have for you today is a pretty special treat. What you're looking at here is the very beginnings of an actual piece I did for a client, several pieces in fact, 14 in total thus far, and this is going to be looking at the original concept art they provided me, and I will show you my full process from beginning to end, how I took it from concept to creation. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so the very first thing that we always do is whenever I get a new piece of concept art, like the one you see here, this is for a bookstore, and this game has kind of a cartoonish feel to it, so you'll see that in a little while. So I get the concept art from the lead, and I have a couple of questions for him right off the bat. First of all is, when is it due? So I know how to manage my time properly, which is a big part of this business. And second question right away is, what is my poly limit? A lot of game engines have limits to the number of polygons they can display on the screen at any one time. That's starting to be erased as we move forward, but this was made a few years ago, and so I wanted to make sure that I didn't overload whatever they were doing. So right away I ask them, when do you need it by, and what are my restrictions? And from there I'm able to do so much more efficiently, get the work done and get it back to him and make sure that he has what he needs and there was as little interruption as possible. Now after I get the information I need as far as when it's due and what are my restrictions, the next thing I do right away is just spend a long time staring at the concept art. I want to kind of take it all in, look at all the things that I'm going to be building, and make sure that I understand, is there anything that is modular? Is there anything that I can reuse instead of having to build it over and over again? Is there anything that's completely unique that I'm going to have to spend special attention on? And when I look at a drawing like this, something you have to understand is no concept art is going to be 100% buildable. It's just not going to happen. There is always a slight adjustment to be made, and a lot of times artists like this, they're trying to get the essence of the scene. They're not going to draw it in such a way that it's perfect, and it's unrealistic to expect such. You're taking a two-dimensional representation of what will be a three-dimensional space. There has to be a translation there, so you just have to accept that and work with that, and it's not a bad thing. For example, here the perspective is off and things are skewed and they will not physically fit together the way that it is described. But that's alright. You know, we can work with that and we can work past that and understand that we're going to take this and we're going to make something great from this. This is just the beginning. This is not the be-all end-all. It will not and does not have to look exactly like this. Another thing that you want to look at is some things are not clear. You know, this is the only drawing I got for this whole scene. So this is all I have to work from. So I need to make sure that I look at it and I ask a lot of questions, because there's things that are not shown or things that are shown but can't possibly exist because of the relationship in which they're drawn to one another. You know, these are some things that you'll learn as you work with more and more art from the same group, or if you get one piece from one person, one time kind of deal. Make sure you ask a lot of questions. There's a difference between a static and a dynamic model. If I have a static model like this it happens to be one camera that doesn't move, so I know that things that are never going to be seen by the camera don't have to exist. So I build it kind of like a movie set. You only build what you're going to see. But you have to understand that if you have a dynamic model, which a lot of games have, these are models that the character or the player is going to be able to walk around and look at from many different angles, so it has to hold up under all those conditions. So you have to know that going in. You have to be smart about it. Now, taking that into account, let me show you here. This was the concept art I was given, and here's some early renders. This is what I sent back to the lead. This, along with an email describing the question I had at each marker. As you can see, there are 21 individual questions here, and I think I reproduced this for the pilgrimage here. I think the original had close to 30. And these are questions like, is this, we have two main characters in the game. Which character is this that he drew here for scale? Are these lamps going to be, where are these lamps going to be? Because I see this lamp drawn off to the side, but I don't see where it is here. It looks like it's a hanging lamp, but there's no representation of it here. So on and so forth. A lot of these numbers here are, do these things continue over, or do they stop here? How many of these pillows are there? Because I can't see beyond this thing. Is there anything on the back side of this? All kinds of questions. What's going to be on these carpets? Do I have to make any special accommodations for any of the texturing? Number 3 here, is there a front to the store here? Do I have to build additional floor space? All kinds of questions that you have to ask and make sure that you fully understand, because it's up to you to build it. So definitely ask questions. You need this information to do your job, so don't be afraid to get that information, because you need it and it's your job to get that information to then do your work. So I've never been turned down at my job by asking questions, so that I make sure I do my job as best as I can, so that the end product is as good as it can possibly be. Alright, so jumping back into Max here, let's take a look at how we went about doing this. The next thing, after I've asked all my questions and gotten all my answers, is I have to establish a scale to the scene. Now, the drawing did show that the scene was about 2 character heights, and when I counted it out, excuse me, when I counted it out, it ended up being about 6 character lengths long. What I always do is ask for an object from the lead that is already constructed and that they're happy with, and that has a relative size that I can work from. So the best possible reference you can ever get, really, in my opinion, is a character. Because with this character, I'm able to tell how big is their gait as far as the steps they're going to be able to take. If I have to measure half steps, how tall are they to make sure they can fit under doorways? How big are their hands, so that I can properly model things like doorknobs or objects that they're going to pick up. These are important things, doors, handles, weapons, mugs, anything that they're going to work with. I need to make sure that it's feasible, that the world kind of works for them, because they're going to be inhabiting this world. So once I have the scale established, I can go ahead and start building, and from there we're going to see 4 total stages to this model, and this scene rather contains many models. And we're going to see the stages as they progress, and each stage I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the things that I did to make the scene work, and we will see how that progresses. So let's go ahead and go to stage 2. Alright, so here we are at stage 2. This is a little further along in the progress here, and I'm starting to work out the size of things and where they're spaced. And if you'll notice from earlier in the concept, I got my questions answered, so these things do indeed stop here. And notice that the door is missing. I wrote back to him and asked, where does this door lead? Do I need to make the door, does it have to ever be opened? Is there anything beyond it? And he said, oh, actually they changed their mind, and that door is going to be handled elsewhere, so we don't need it in this scene. So it's a good thing that I asked. What I did here was, let me ungroup this stuff so I can kind of show you. The skull here was made from the character head. So this way that the skull has a very similar polyflow, similar distribution to the existing character's head, so it's a little easier for the texture artist to work with. And for these pages here, these are going to be text on the wall. And what I did was I made these out of 2 polys so that they could be animated to kind of flap in the wind, or with a clever use of UVs, you could double up on the texture space to extend the text. You need to make sure you understand what it's going to be and how it's going to be used. And even things like these steps here, the stairs on either side, even though I could go ahead and just put an edge across here and we just call this one big polygon, for now, early on in the stage, I have it split into 2 steps. I've measured it out, so I know that the distance is correct. And if they come back later and tell me, hey, I really do want it separated like this so that they can reuse the textures, I've got it handled, and it's really not that huge of an impact poly count wise, so it's not too much of a trouble. So let's go ahead and move on to the 3rd phase, and we'll take a look at some of the changes there. Alright, so here we are in the 3rd stage of the model's progress, and you can see that the room here has gotten a little bit more complex, and we started to add some of the other objects that make up the major forms of the room. I always work big to small, and some things that were going to be a little bit more difficult, I went ahead and did them, like the pillows. I knew there was going to be more than one pillow. Excuse me. So I made one, and of course duplicate. Never work harder than you have to. Always reuse as much as you can. And what I wanted to show you here were a couple things in particular. The books. For the bookshelves, I realized, you're never going to see the books from the back, so those don't have to exist. Those faces, I mean. And it's too much trouble, really, when you have a library or a bookstore here of hundreds of books, and you don't really have to have individual groups if you do it smart. So what I've done here is I've looked at the concept art, and there are two essential sizes to the books, if you will. There's these kind of fat ones you see on the right, and what I call the skinny ones you see on the left. So what I did in order to maximize my efficiency is I created groupings of 1, 2, and 3 of each, and using those I could take those as modular parts and create a whole wall of books with quite a great deal of variety without having to have too many individuals. And this way you can reuse the UVs, you can change the color on them with vertex painting, and you can really make some great walls of books that are very convincing without having to have all these individual models. It's quite a pain. And another thing is, if you're modeling something and it's kind of in between where you can get feedback, I always advocate do more. If you have the time and the effort, of course. So what I did here was for this middle bookshelf here that you see it's missing at the moment because they're over here. I had a question and I wrote to the lead and I didn't hear back, so I moved on. But what I did was, in the meantime, while I was waiting for him to respond, I kept working on other things. For the bookshelf, I made 3 versions because I had a question where it could be 3 different ways based upon how I interpreted the concept art. So I just went ahead and made all 3. As you can see, my original interpretation was that this bookshelf was kind of, I don't know the term for it here, it's hollow in the middle. You could put books and reach them from either side. But then I thought, well, it could also be solid. And if it's solid, what's on the other side? So originally these two just had solid backs, and that was it. And you can see I duplicated the pages on the edges all the way over. After I heard back from the lead, he told me, in fact, that the door that we removed earlier was the purpose that it served in the story was going to be told by these posters on the back of this bookshelf. So I'm glad I made ones that had a back to it. So I sent him back this with a couple variations of 2 big posters and some like wanted posters and some informations, and he ended up that he was very happy with these. So I believe we went with this one in the end, this middle one here. But yeah, you'll see it later on in the final product. But since I didn't know, I decided to just make a couple variants. They were nice and quick and easy, and then I just kept working like this on the scene. And then when he wrote back to me and said, oh, this is the one I like, then I just deleted these 2, moved this one into place, and moved forward. So if you have an opportunity like this, or if you have a scenario like this where you're not sure, just go ahead and try a couple things. And for one, you might learn how to do something better. And a lot of times when I rebuild something, I build it better the second time around. So there's no harm in it. You learn a bit, and you're prepared for whatever kind of example, sorry, I just saw the word example, so I said it. Whatever kind of situation they come back to you and say, oh, we changed our mind, or oh, this didn't work, we're going to do this. You're ready. You have backups. You have additional things. So it's, I never turn down doing more 3D modeling, so why not, so long as it doesn't impact your schedule, and make sure that you make the customer happy. So, all right, let's move on to the final stage, and we'll take a look at the changes there. Alright, so here we are at the final scene. This is the scene as it was delivered to the client. And what I've done here is I have a save file just before this that I call my pre-cleanup. And I send the pre-cleanup to the lead and say, I'm done, what do you think? And if he sends back and says, you're good, move forward, what I do is I then go through the cleanup phase. And in this particular scenario, this is a static camera game, so every scene the character walks in and you click around and they walk to those locations. So the camera doesn't move So I can delete anything the camera doesn't see. Now I do have to take into account I have a second camera here. This is set up to show there is the puzzle, as I mentioned, on the back side here, that the character has to be able to walk around here, so the camera does shift. So I need to take that into account and make sure that I don't put anything in a position where if I delete it, these cameras will show that. So I need to be careful and understand how it's going to be viewed by the player in the end. But for the most part, I can go through and delete anything else. So before cleanup, I checked and it was 6,800 polygons, and my limit was 55 to 6,000. I asked the lead and he said error on the side of 6,000. So after cleanup, I'm at 5,700. So just a little bit over the 55 mark, still below the 6,000 mark, and I saved 1,100 polygons. And nowadays it's not as important because modern engines can really push polygons, and that's not the bottleneck any longer. But at the time of this creation it was, so I wanted to make sure that he had what he needed and we weren't going way over budget, and that the game would run smoothly, especially since he was going to port this or attempt to port this to like an iPad or something like that. And one final note here about it's very important that you ask the questions in the beginning, like I had stated, and get those responses, because that will determine what you build and what you delete. For example, here, let's look around the scene. Based upon the original concept art, I was not really able to see back here or behind this. So I didn't know that there were going to be things on this wall, and I didn't know that there was going to be a puzzle back here. That was decided later, and you can see here the giant posters on the wall. And it's important because normally you would think, oh, I'm going to start modeling and all I need are these steps, but actually you need steps over here too, because the character is going to have to be able to walk up here. So I'm glad that early on I didn't delete those, and I just kept them in place. I actually made them go all the way across and then split them in the middle, so that I had that resource and I could always get rid of it later. And you make sure you understand where the camera is going to move, if it's going to move. It's a big difference between making a model like this, where there's not those fourth walls or the ceiling, and making a model for a modern console game where the character can walk all the way around it and you can view it from different sides. So ask those questions, get those answers, make sure you make your models as best as you possibly can, and from there you will only have great work and very happy customers who want to give you more work. Like I said, this is only one of about 14 models that I've made for this company so far. It's a fantastic company. I'm really enjoying kind of freelancing for them. I will provide some information at the bottom of the page if you want to check out how this particular game is going, and look forward to seeing it released. And yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of the Polygon Pilgrimage. I've got questions rolling in about some of the tools. So now that I have the ability to do these videos for you guys where I can really showcase, me working on things, I think we're going to move into some what's the word for it? I guess it's demos. We're going to do some demos of some of the tools. So next week we're going to be demoing Alchemy, and then I will show you some of the tricks in GIMP and Photoshop, maybe some XNormal, and we'll move forward from there, and look forward to a special guest joining us in a few weeks. So that'll keep you on your toes. All right, well, enjoy the quote at the bottom of the page, and I look forward to seeing you guys again next time as the pilgrimage continues.